Hello everyone, it's George from Taurus Mortgages. I'd be crazy and lying if I would say to you that I wasn't excited to have our special guest, Mark Breslin, here today. You know, just going through the stuff on Mark's resume, man, it was too long, you know, from comedian to producer to author to the list was too long, but I'll let Mark explain that. But you know, I've heard so many wonderful things about Mark. He's a great storyteller. He's definitely an icon in the Canadian marketplace with his, you know, with his Yuk Yuks brand behind him, and I just look forward to it just as much as I'm sure a lot of people are. So welcome, Mark. And my other guy that I have here is my dear friend and business partner, John Paul. For you guys who don't know him, he's a stand-up comedian, and he knows Mark extremely well. But I got to know John Paul over the years, and you know, he's a comedian. But for most of you who don't know, he's also the founder and VP of operations for Wealth No Joke, and he'll tell you a little bit about that. But I just look forward to this. And John Paul's job today is to really keep Mark and I in line and just keep us on track. And so that said, you know, I'll hand over the camera over to John Paul now. And we'll take it from there.
Thank you, George. Welcome to Wealth No Joke. This is in conjunction with Taurus Mortgage and their No Bull Keeping It Real podcast. I'm actually happy to have these two guests. I'm actually very ecstatic to mention not only are they are influential in my life, but I'm lucky enough to be able to call them friends. Mark Breslin, I've known for about 25 years, as we've discovered. And he is the founder and CEO of the Yuk Yuks international comedy chain, one of the largest comedy chains in the entire world, as well as he's an Order of Canada holder. He usually wears it on his jacket, but today he is not wearing it, thankfully. Also an author and just all around one of my favorite people to have conversations with, so it's a pleasure to have him here with me, as well as George, who is also my partner in Wealth No Joke and probably one of the saviors of my life when it comes to financial literacy. So he's had over 20 years in the financial business, and in the last 3 years has been one of the top mortgage brokerages in Canada. So we are here finally for Wealth No Joke. So I think the initial question I'm going to start off with our special guest, Mark, and I'm sure you get this question all the time over the last whatever decades, is how did you end up being the founder and CEO of probably the most prominent comedy club franchise in North America?
You know, it's funny, Jean-Paul, I get that question a lot. I am often congratulated for my prescience in seeing a marketplace that could be developed for stand-up comedy from so long ago, because I started 44 years ago. But I promise you, that was never the case. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have an idea of what I was going to do in the future. I just didn't want to go to law school. That was the important thing, to not go to law school, because I had all the parts to become a lawyer. And I didn't want to do it because I knew a lot of lawyers and they were miserable. And it was also the end of the 60s, it was the beginning of the 70s, and everybody was involved in, you know, sort of finding your own thing. People weren't as success-oriented as they are now. It was the idea of doing something that was relevant and meaningful to you. I was involved in a lot of kind of counterculture stuff, a lot of radical political organizations when I was a teenager, and a lot of experimental and independent theater stuff. This kind of came naturally. Look, I had a degree in English literature from York University, which meant I could work for any taxi company in the world. So I didn't really have a lot to lose. All my friends became, were getting their masters and PhDs, and I was doing pretty much nothing. And then I got a call from Canada Manpower and said, there's this job that would be really good for you for the summer, working at this new place called Harbourfront in Toronto. Well, what had happened was the federal government had put a lot of money into buying this property, and they wanted to, you know, make sure that people were okay with it, so they started putting on shows. I was there as part of the original programming team to put on shows, because I always loved going out in Toronto. That was something I did every night of the week. I was at a concert, I was at a piece of theater, I was doing something, and I knew everybody. What I didn't know was anybody in comedy. Comedy had never really crossed my mind. Now, it's true that when I was growing up, I watched all the classic sitcoms and I listened to all those great albums in basements with friends with pot. But outside of that, there was nothing to say this was what I was going to spend my life doing, or even this was what I was going to spend, a couple of years doing. But I fell in love with these comics that I met at Harborfront. And then I started emceeing a show. Well, I'd always done public speaking, but never anything funny. And I found I loved that too. Everything was sweet for a couple of years, and then they fired everybody from Harborfront. And all my friends who were comics said, well, where are we going to play? Because I was always like the designated driver of the group. So I found a place that was doing folk music, and I was involved in the folk scene at that time in the early 70s because I had a girlfriend who was a folk singer. So I took all the comics down to this folk scene, which was happening on Saturday nights at what do you call it, like a community center on Church Street. Everybody always thinks I started in a church, but it wasn't. I started in a community center on Church Street. And I put the comics in between the folk singers, and it was a disaster. It was a disaster because the comics hated the folk singers hated the comics. The folk singers were full of love and peace, and they smelled of patchouli oil, and they sang beautiful songs about the environment and nature. And the comics were backstage smoked, chain smoking cigarettes and swearing and wearing all black. And then they would go on, and it was just a disaster. So I had the best idea I ever had in my life. It was a simple one. I went to the board of the community center, and I said, can I have a comedy night here? Let's say a Wednesday. And they said, yeah, you could do that. We have to charge you for the room. I said, how much? They said, $38. And I thought, where am I going to get $38? What am I, made of money? Because I was on UIC at the time. But I thought, wait a minute, I'll charge $1. And I'll charge $1 to get in. And that way I can have some money for myself, pay the cost of the room, and pay the lead comic, which is what I did. Called it Yuk Yuks. Everybody always wants to know, why did you call it Yuk Yuks? It was actually because I was a big Three Stooges fan. Yuck, 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 yuck. Was really the reason. And also because very often in these early days, it wasn't that funny. The comics weren't that good. And people would go, yuck, 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 kind of ironically. Little did I know that when I called it Yuk Yuks, intuitively, I was expressing the kind of comedy that I liked. Now, comedy comes from different chakras in the body, and different sounds and different feelings. And there's a big difference between the reaction you have cerebrally to a New Yorker cartoon and down here, which you would laugh at for sex jokes. I wanted something from down here because I thought too much in Canada was from up here. I wanted it to be raw and gritty. And we made the decision really early on to keep the sex in and keep the anger in. All those lower chakra, bass heavy. We kept the bass in. We were heavy bass. We wanted to compare it to music. We kept the bass in and amplified the bass in 1978 in comedy, and that changed everything. So all those things were a stew that created the Yuk Yuks that you know today. That was a very long-winded answer, and I apologize for that.
No, but that's how we found out about the history of how it started, And for me, being a buff, what I also knew back then in those days, it was less solo stand-up acts and more ensemble based. So, who were the influences back then?
Good question. Well, Canada traditionally does not have a stand-up comedy tradition. It had Dave Broadfoot. That was about it. But I come from the first generation of people who were watching American television in the late 50s, early 60s. We'd all watch Ed Sullivan. We'd see all these really funny stand-up comics that they would have on, and we'd go, wow, I really like that. But prior to that, nobody really knew about it. So this television kind of rationalizes culture because you can be a Canadian, but you know everything that's happening in American culture because you just have to turn on the TV. That's what we did, and that's what we emulated. However, that's one of the paradoxes of Yuk Yuks is that I always wanted it to be pretty close to 100% Canadian in terms of who was doing it, but I wanted it to feel really American and international in what they did.
Okay, so speaking of that from your perspective, now from George, your perspective, I know you have huge and fond memories of comedy clubs, specifically Yuk Yuks. You know, can you talk about some of that from your perspective?
Yeah, that was amazing, Mark. I love the history what you just gave me. Very, it's very, very informative. I loved hearing that. But you know what John Paul said. I immigrated from Jamaica, from the Caribbean, in the 70s, and I came to Canada. And I still remember, I was one of those guys that memorized jokes like crazy, and I would tell jokes to my family all the time. And they go, George, find a new career. Not a young age, right? But even though I wasn't very good at it, Yuk Yuks, I remember going to Yuk Yuks from a very, very young age, and it kind of shaped my life. And in fact, I actually met John Paul one day when John Paul came into my office, and he would refer to me through a really good client of mine. He looked so familiar, and when he told me where he worked, he said, Yuk Yuks. I said, that's where I've seen you. So, I think, your branding and comedy to me is, I find comedy is a hidden talent. I don't know any other way to say it. But this world, the world, even in today's world, is so unpredictable. Things can change on a dime.
True, and on the other hand, George, people are naturally funny. People are born funny. Children, infants are born laughing.
They are.
And yet, as we age, that laughter, that ability to find the funny, is kind of beaten out of us. And I don't mean physically, but it's just emotionally beaten out of us. And only some people survive with that sense of humor intact. The funniest people I know are not necessarily comics. They're doctors, they're teachers, they're people who work in a bank. But what they can't do, that a comic can do, is they can't do it every night, no matter what, no matter how they feel, to an audience of strangers with a big light in their face. So that's the difference.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, so, going back to that, like the laughter I find with the world changing, and people in general are stressed out. I find that, the most amazing thing to me is that when I was younger, I had no stress. Then my goal was that, as I get older and older, when you started going to university and stuff, you start getting more stressed out, finding a job. And it's always in my plans that when I graduated and had a job and started making money, my stress level would drop. And I'm finding it as I get older, my stress level is actually going up because we have more responsibilities, whether it's for kids and stuff. And so, comedy to me, it's a release. Absolutely. It's such a release. People don't laugh enough. Mm-hmm. I love laughing. It's healthy. I feel so much better after I laugh. So I think,
I tell new comics that they're in the massage therapy business.
Yeah.
The only difference is it's an internal diaphragmatic kind of massage. But there's no doubt that this is about stress release. It's one of the proudest things that I'm able to be proud of. That when I watch audiences as much as I watch comics. And when the audiences come in, I see how they come in. And their shoulders are tight, and they're hunched over a little bit because, that day they had an argument with their boss, they had an argument with their spouse, their kids acted up, they didn't know what to do, they've got financial problems, they've got health problems, and if they're Jewish, they have all of those. So, so they come in like that, and then they laugh, and they laugh, and they laugh, and they laugh, and they laugh for, 90 minutes, 2 hours, and then when they walk out, I swear they've gone from this
to
that.
Yeah.
And that's a great feeling. When I'm feeling down about the business, and sometimes I feel down about the business, I watch that and I remind myself that I'm actually doing some kind of social good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one of the things that, again, in doing the little bit of research that I did was, it took you a little while to embrace or even admit that you were actually running a business back in the church, not in the church, but on church, where it took you about 6 months because you were just stashing money in shoeboxes as opposed to opening a bank account.
No, it took me much longer than that. I was still using shoeboxes when I opened up the full-time comedy club on Bay Street in 1978. The only difference was I couldn't use my shoeboxes because I have little feet. So I asked my friend who has big feet to give me his shoeboxes because we were dealing with more cash. But we were still using shoeboxes well into 1979 because we still didn't think it was a real business. We couldn't believe it was a business. I kept pinching myself that every day I would wake up and I would go to what actually was a real business. I didn't make a lot of money at the time, but I was really happy getting paid anything to do what I love to do.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So do you still feel the same way about comedy? Do you and do you also find it ironic in talking about, as stressed as everybody is, especially now in these COVID-19 times, that as entertainers we're probably going to be one of the last to go back, to doing what is probably best for the world. Like COVID-19 last vaccine is what most people need.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's really sad that people like us are struggling so hard and will continue to struggle so hard for so long. But once we're back, we'll be back for good, and because people need us. Yeah. People need food, they need shelter, they need water, they need insurance. These are the things that people need more than anything else. But after you do all those things, and after all those needs, the hierarchy of needs are satisfied, why are we living becomes the question. And why we are living is what entertainers and artists are supposed to provide the answer for.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons I have the two of you on this podcast is, like I said, both I highly respect both of you, and I find you guys have parallel, even though you're in different industries, you have parallel, both successful entrepreneurs, both visionaries, both great at seeing potential from financial to comedic. So I was going to run through a couple questions that I will ask both of you to see how you guys respond from both sides of your coins. So speaking of the whole COVID-19 and you saying, by the time we go back to normal, how do you see, will this be a big thing for people? Will it just be a blip? Will people be talking about this in history books later on from a comedic level, or is this just something that's...
I'm not exactly sure of the question there. I know this. When we all go back to work, I don't think there's going to be a lot of material about COVID or about Donald Trump, because we've just about had enough of it.
Yeah.
And I think what people really want is just to hear normal material about everyday life and things that are happening. We did a drive-in show, which was bizarre to begin with, last week. And I went to it, and you're on stage, and then there's a hill, and there's all these cars staring at you. Like you're in Cars 2 or something. And
great movie.
You tell jokes, the comic tells jokes, and if they like the joke, they honk a horn, bam. But one thing I noticed was there were 3 comics on. They did about 3 COVID jokes off the top, and then they just went into their act, and people seemed so grateful. Grateful to be back to some kind of
normalcy.
Where we talked about relationships, and we talked about pop culture, and we talked about families, and we talked about sex, and we talked about whatever the normal topics are that people talk about. Because I've had it up to here with COVID, and if my wife turns on CNN one more time for the death count, I'm just going to run away.
Because I also think that's it's almost like on social media, like where everyone on social media with their statuses think they're being original when something comes out. Everyone just has a different version of, and it's like the first day of school. How many first back to school pictures can I take of your stinking kids?
Do you remember when it first happened that everybody had a Corona beer joke? Everybody,
and then followed by the toilet paper jokes.
Toilet paper jokes, and it's all very hacky now. But I'm really looking forward to, and we're starting to open up our clubs on a limited basis. And I'm looking forward to people talking about a lot of things besides the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Because
And
we can't just be defined by one thing.
Agreed. And George, with you, from the financial and the real estate market, how do you see COVID, once we get past it, how are people going to look back on at this time?
I'll start off by saying, COVID is the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to talk about it. I 100% agree with you. But the one thing that we can't, ignore is the fact that COVID had a huge impact on each and every one of our lives, personally, business, and everything. And the one thing that it took me so long to dissect, what the hell is this COVID? I actually never thought it would last anywhere close to where it is now. I didn't think it would have the impact, but impact me very much, like personally. Like my mother's 84 years old, and I didn't see her, and she was locked up in a kitchen coop for 2.5 months because we were scared for her. I'd go to the house, wave through the window, and it was difficult. But I agree 100% with Mark that people, I watched CNN. I was one of those guys at the start. The rallies, the riots, everything. I was watching every night. I got so sick of it, Mark. I haven't turned on my TV for 2-3 weeks. I don't want to hear another word about Trump. That said, I think when it comes to my business and financially, I think people are starting to realize we have to make change. But, I'm going to go on with my life. And, some of my friends are saying like, George, I can't wait to get on a plane. We're a little scared, but I think that it will come back to normal. People will go back to the comedy clubs because, you know what? My biggest worry is that it's not the impact of COVID. Because COVID, it had a lot of impact on deaths and people getting, but what people don't realize is the impact on mental health of people. We're lucky in North America, where we're just complaining that we're cooped up and we have to wear a mask. There's other people in this world, like in Africa and stuff, who lost jobs, have no money. They're stressed that they can't find enough food to feed their children. And now the mental health ratio had gone from, I think they said 1 in 18 to 1 in 4.
Yeah.
That's a big worry.
Hold on. I think it's going to be Jean Paul's steps.
That's a good one. But you know what? Move on. We got to move on, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As entrepreneurs, what's the pivot? What's the pivot now? How do you approach going forward?
I think like just a brief discussion on like finances. I think people have realized that, you know what? I have to be more prepared. Because if I lose my job for 2 months, I have to be in a better position. So I think people are starting to position themselves a little better. Some of them don't know how to do it. And I love teaching people how to do it. Mm-hmm. But everybody has to save for a rainy day. Because honestly, I'm not sure if this is the last.
Well, yeah. I mean,
COVID
that's
type,
something that you have to worry about. This could happen again. It'll be a different virus. Happen in another 5 years. Yeah. I think this is designed to. This is designed to have us prepare for the next apocalyptic event.
Okay.
And we have to prepare for apocalyptic events.
Yeah.
This is the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
it could be anything. It could be this. It could be, some kind of nuclear conflagration. It could be an environmental thing that happens next. But something is going to happen next because the world has just become too top heavy with stuff and too much conflict, too much conflagration. The environment's being just pummeled all the time. One of the good things about COVID, have you noticed how blue the sky is?
Yeah.
Oh my
Have
God.
you noticed how clear the air has gotten?
Yeah.
I wouldn't suggest this is the answer to environmental problems, but it does suggest that we've got problems that go beyond COVID.
It is.
You have to kind of start dealing with them, and you're right, George, that you have to prepare for those financially as well.
Yeah.
And I know you sometimes say that comics should never think logically, from a comedic perspective. When it comes to all the conspiracy theories from they're trying to control the world, they want people to go cashless, this is 5G, this is just Tesla's way of trying to sell cars, whatever it is. Do you honestly think that there's any conspiracy theories, related to this?
I rarely believe in conspiracies because I just don't think humanity is that well organized.
Right.
There's just too many, there would just have to be too many people involved. And it would come out, 3 people can't keep a secret. How can 3 million people keep a secret? So, no, I don't think it's a conspiracy, although I think that there are people out there who would take advantage of things going bad. I think that's entirely possible. Yeah. But I don't think there's a cabal of people in a room who sit there thinking, okay, we can control people if we just release this virus into the world. I think the virus gets out into the world and then they figure out, how can we turn this to our advantage? Yeah. That's not the same thing as a conspiracy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to piggyback on that, it's true. I don't know how people could keep a secret. It would definitely come out, right? So I think that the only thing is that, what COVID done, it's actually brought families closer together. We realize how important family time and stuff is right now, right? And, I think that my number one message for people: embrace change and make changes accordingly. And if you're thinking that it's going to go back exactly 100% where it was, we're not going to be prepared properly. We got to embrace this change and make changes.
My 9-year-old has spent every single day with us since March. And eventually, he's going to have to go back to school or whatever happens, and he's going to miss us. Yeah. And we're going to miss him terribly because this has become the new normal of being around each other all the time. So how do we cope with that? It's an unusual thing to worry about, but I think that with kids who have become so close with their parents, they almost don't want to leave them now.
Yeah. So what do you think some of the options are? Homeschooling?
I tried that. And guess what? I can't do grade 4 math.
I realized that was a lot.
I got through school.
Yeah, I realized the same thing.
I know. I have even more respect for teachers now than I did before all this happened. And I always had respect for teachers. But now, oh boy, it's so hard to get kids to focus on stuff, and it's exhausting. And I would say that the homeschooling that we tried for the first 2 months, I guess March and April, that was the most stressful time of all for us. And I don't know what we're going to do yet. We're investigating all kinds of things. It seems to be a choice between education and health, and I'm not sure which we're going to choose. We might keep him home and do tutors. We might send him to a regular school and just keep him out, only have him go to school, a day here and a day there and use tutors. We might send him back to the private school that we were involved with, but we weren't really happy with what they were doing, but we liked their health plan, their idea of what they're going to do to guarantee the kids' health. So we like that part of it. I don't know. It's only a month away and we don't know.
Yeah.
I've been having a lot of discussions with people about school, whether it's elementary school or university or high school. I've been having a ton of discussions about people about going back to work versus working home. And, my view is this. I think that the one thing, let's go to the workforce. A lot of people who kept their jobs, they just worked from home, but they kept working, right? And they enjoyed it because, COVID started in the spring and the summer. Free time, it's more, But I don't think it's a long-term solution. I don't think it's a long-term solution because I have clients and friends and stuff that told me that it's been nice working at home, but I need that human interaction. I need to know my boss. My boss needs to know me, or I'm not getting promoted. I can't learn enough on a Zoom call because they tell me, we go on these Zoom calls, George, and we talk about the business, and then they turn off the Zoom. But when I'm at work, that's when I get to interact with people, right? And that's missing at work. But when I go to the school system, that's also missing. And there's a big talk right now that the balance, we talked about health and education. A lot of people think if kids stay home, they're worried about the mental health.
But we're social creatures by design, I would imagine, as far as interaction goes. And it's funny that on your side, the financial side and the business side, you're talking about Zoom calls and these online meetings and conferences and needing that interaction. What would you say is, I'm sure you've heard of the Zoom comedy shows where people have to do online shows. I'm sure those, need, it's ironic that both sides need interaction in order for it to be maximum.
Yeah. So anyway, even when it comes to interaction with my clients, I've been using Zoom calls and stuff for the last 3 months and doing webinars and stuff. And I've noticed that as the city's starting to open up and we're going through the stages, my clients want to see me. And it's the same thing for comedy. I've watched almost every comedy show on Netflix. I've watched them all. I want to see a live comedian. I'm done with TV. It's not the same. And I'm not the only one. I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that way.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I've been doing some business on Zoom, but what I find is if I really want to get something done, I invite somebody to come to a park, sit at a park bench, I'll sit on the next park bench, and we'll scream at each other like a couple of old Jews. And it really works well if you're training, as I am, to become an old Jew. So nothing replaces face-to-face, flesh-to-flesh.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel really badly. I see friends and I can't give them a hug.
Yeah.
To say hello.
Yeah.
And we are in a huggy business.
Yeah.
You may not be, but
I am.
You
Very
are?
much,
Okay,
yeah.
because we're in a business where we see each other. We hug each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
You have a good set. Somebody comes
Yeah.
up to you. They hug you.
Yeah.
You hug.
Yeah.
And it's not a Me Too thing, but we hug. And you can't hug anybody. You can't press the flesh. You can't say, "I'm with you. You're my brother. You're my sister. You're my," you can't do that, and that's really frustrating. And that's going to be the same for a long time. People are not going to shake hands. The Japanese were way ahead of the curve when they developed the bow as a way of saying hello.
Oh my
and
God,
goodbye.
yeah.
When you think about it, they were way ahead of everybody. The Muslims were way ahead of everybody when they had the face covering.
Oh my God.
No, think
It's
about
true.
it.
Yeah.
Think about it. I wasn't trying to. I wasn't even trying to be funny there. It's just that all the things that we take for granted, these lack of barriers that we have with people, are all going to have to be reevaluated.
Yeah.
And one of the questions before we had actually jumped on camera, we were talking about, so because of the lockdown and quarantines and people spending lots of time on social media, we were kind of talking about social media comedians or celebrities, and talking about it from a work perspective, like putting in the work and putting in the effort to be, not necessarily an expert, but on your way to being an expert, or the 10,000, is it the 10,000 hours?
10,000 hours, 10,000 sets.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to have the 10,000 represent. 10,000 seems to be a pretty good number.
Yeah.
And how important is that for comedy in watching the social media age? How important is still putting in the 10,000 sets, 10,000 hours?
I think it's really crucial. Of course it's crucial, and that's one thing that's hurting comics, fledgling comics, more than established comics, because if you don't have the place where you can put the 10,000 hours in, or do the 10,000 sets, then it's going to take you much longer. This has been a wasted year in just so many ways. It's just cross it off. Maybe we've learned something from it, but I can't wait for it to be over and for us to go back to some veneer of normal.
Yeah. And what about you, George? How do you feel about has social media in the real estate business and in the real estate industry, have people taken to that more? Is it lending to people who don't necessarily have the expertise and kind of exploiting the situation?
Like I think Mark made a comment before that, social media, the one thing I realized, it's huge. It's very influential. And you mentioned that this 10,000, whatever it is, of hours of performances, whatever it is as a comic to become a star. You're seeing overnight hits on the TikToks, and these guys are having millions and millions of followers. I have a good friend of mine, and his son's now an influencer on TikTok, and he did it in a matter of like 5-6 months. It's unbelievable. And he's walking around and people are recognizing him. So I understand the power of social media and stuff like that, and it has influence. It's gonna be a big driver of people in the future.
But I think the faster you become a star, the faster you will not become a star for long.
Right.
If you want sustainability in your career, you have to have a foundation. Just like if you build a house, you have to have a foundation, or a tornado is going to come along and knock it away like that. So there's no substitute for doing the grind work, the rough work, showing up at a club, doing your set, having everybody ignore you, but you remember that there was a joke that was really good in there, you're going to do it anyway the next time, and it's a game of inches. If you're a comedian, you're building an asset base and a business just like any other business, except your assets happen to be your jokes, your bits. And those are yours alone. No one can take them away from you. They are proprietary to you. And the only way you can make them really good is by taking them out into the marketplace and doing a market test. If that's, if you want to talk in, sort of financial terms about what comedy is, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And to use a comedy term, to segue, to take a little time for myself, one of my ulterior motives in having the two of you here on this podcast specifically was the fact that you two are probably two of the most impactful people to enter my life for different reasons. You from a comedic perspective. You have been nothing but encouraging, even though your business is to see potential and to at least acknowledge and encourage and give, but you've also been very open and very honest. You've given me opportunities I would never have even remotely thought I would have been able to have. One of them is going to Israel, which, I would love to talk about after.
Excuse me. I brought a black man to Israel. Don't tell me about diversity. Sorry to interrupt.
But to say that, I don't think I would be where I am career-wise or even relationship-wise, with my wife and my kids, if it wasn't for you and the opportunities you've continued to give and lend to me. And I wanted to say the same thing about George. You have completely changed my entire perspective on business and finances, and have taught me to be literate and combining the comedy with the financial literacy. I am now an owner of 2 rental properties on top of already having a house, which as a comedian is unheard of. But again, it's just the necessary people and the information that is taught. So I really, really have to thank George and you for changing, and you, Mark, for changing the narrative on how I approach life comedically and how I approach it financially. And I want to be able to combine the two with a business that I founded with George called Wealth No Joke, where we can somehow teach financial literacy through comedy, and trying to figure out a way to make that happen. So that's part of the ulterior motive of getting you two together, to see how we can make that happen, in the future going forward. So I just want to say, on top of that long-winded, I want to say thank you to both of you for being so impactful in my life.
But it also works the other way around. I mean, I'm nobody without the relationships that I have with the comics. So you've brought a lot to my business too. So, it isn't just one way. It doesn't just work.
Oh, thank you.
John Paul, thanks for the compliments, but he's amazing to work with.
Yeah.
When he first came in, a lot of people, I find this in general about people. If you can't admit that you're not good at something, you can't fix it. He came in, he was open as a book. I'm terrible, George. I pay my bills when I have time. Like, it was awful. But at the other end, I told him, that's awful. You're now an adult. Mm-hmm. You might be a comedian in life, but you can't treat your finances as a joke. Mm-hmm. And we started talking about this, and it's true. Like, so many people, the best way to hide your financial illiteracy or your financial problems is to ignore them. But ignoring, we all know what's going to happen. You're just going to get sunken into the mud even more. And there's one thing that I've learned through this, I've been doing a lot of reading, and the one thing that comes to mind all the time now is that life is stressful. Control the things you can control. And if you can't control those, the things you can't control take over. And I love that quote. I live my life by it now. I can't worry about Donald Trump anymore, right? I got to worry about what I can do, about my family. And so you've been a wonderful student. I'm sure Mark would say the same. So you've done well. I love the path you're on.
Oh, thank you. So, a couple things before, because
student becomes the teacher. But you must remember, you got the ball more.
Yes.
This is what's important. They come to the top of the mountain to talk to me, but I tell them, you got the ball more. That's important.
Yeah.
I know we got to wrap this up shortly, so I'll pass it over to you before I pass something to George as well, as far as a question. We mentioned you took a black man to Israel, which is true, which was great. So two black stories I want you to tell. One, why me for Israel? I was always curious about that. And two, is there any truth to you donating or raising funds for the Black Panther Party in the 70s?
Okay, so the first thing is, why did I choose you? I wanted a diverse complement of people to go to on that trip, but that wasn't the first idea. When I approached the Israeli government, I said, I have 6 great Jewish comics, and they went, no, we don't want Jewish comics. I said, what do you mean you don't want Jewish comics? I said, well, we already have their support. We want to get support from other places in the community, so we would prefer you to have a more diverse group. And I said, well, okay, but like, are you telling me I can't even have one Jew on the show? And he went, all right, you can have a Jew. And then I said, but wait a minute, you know and I know that a Jew needs another Jew to talk to. So can I book a second Jew on? And
Oh my
all right,
God.
2 Jews, but that's it. And I felt like Schindler. You know, it was the weirdest thing. But the tour really worked, and I think that people in Israel appreciated seeing Canadians that were all quite different from one another.
Yeah.
All right, the second thing, I was involved in a lot of radical stuff when I was, somewhere between 17 and 21. And yes, I did raise money for the Panthers. I always loved the Panthers. I always loved what they did. I don't know whether you saw the documentary on them, but I thought it was a fantastic documentary. And yes, I did. And do I believe in Black Lives Matter? Absolutely, completely. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't that has a
Absolutely.
heart and a brain? But this is really important. In my business, I hire the best people.
Agreed.
As it happens, when all this stuff started going down, I took a look at my roster and I started going, okay, what's the percentage here? What am I dealing with? And it's a terrible way to look at things in terms of quotas, but I did find out that 24% of our roster are people of color, which I think is pretty good.
Yeah.
And you can always do better, but
Yeah.
it's pretty good. But I never want anybody to think that they're getting a job from me because they tick a box. I want people to know that if they've got the job, that's because they're really good.
They're good.
I think the
Want them to
wrong
have that confidence because they deserve that confidence.
and I think the wrong thing to do with any comedian in comedy is to not only to pander to them, but allow them to pander to the audience.
Right. Look, I wouldn't want to get a job somehow because, I'm Jewish, right? Unless that were the job of Prime Minister. Something big. Then I do it. But I want everybody to have that job knowing they deserve that job because they're that good. And I stand behind every one of my clients because they're that good.
Appreciated. And George, with you, you've always had a passion for comedy. I know this. And you're very supportive of comedy or using comedy to educate. And
Yeah.
I'd like you to explain, because I know why Mark loves comedy. How do you see comedy being a tool to educate people?
Like I mentioned, I've loved comedy since I was a very young boy, personally. But when I grew up later on and I realized that, today we talked about social media. I wanted to attract young kids, old kids, whatever it is, minorities, people who are underprivileged, all those kind of people, and they would never come listen to me. So I found that I had to find a way to get them to come see me. You know what it was? Comedy. John Paul and I did a show up the road, and we had 100 millennials come. And what do millennials usually do is that they're on their phones when they get bored. Not one of them touched their phones. So John Paul opened up the stage to these guys. It got them in the mood. You got to get in the mood. They got them in the mood, and I seriously started to talking to them, and it was phenomenal. So the comedy, I know kids love comedy. I can't get kids out if there's no bait for them, right? Comedy and food and booze, right? I get that out there, it's actually beneficial for them. And what came out of that were guys who became very, very embraced with their financial performance, for their young families, they changed, almost like what John Paul did, right? So I will continue to embrace comedy, not only because I love it, I think it's a physical therapy, but I think it's a great way to educate people. And everybody that's seen stuff that I talk about, comedy and education, they go, that is freaking amazing. And I think there's a place in this world for it. And so I love this talk we had. The one thing before I leave, that's my answer to John Paul, is that I'm so fascinated about brands. Branding.
Branding.
Logos,
Right.
branding. I work for some of the best branded companies in the world. And that brand, it's so strong and powerful. And I think right before we had this meeting, we were talking about the Yuk Yuks brand. I'm still amazed, Mark, I'm amazed. my kids are young and they know Yuk Yuks.
Well, I
So-
think the statistic that we found out is that 82% of Canadians who are above the age of 18 and speak English know Yuk Yuks and know what it is.
Yeah.
And know what, they may not have been to it, but they know what it is.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty proud of that. I'm proud I put my name on the logo.
Yeah.
A lot of people thought, oh, well, that's, because he's an egomaniac. And that may be true, but that's why I put the name on the logo. I did that to protect my ownership of my brand.
Oh, good for you.
That's good.
So,
So to answer your call, John Paul, I think comedy it's something that I think people love, but people are not serious about it. And I think it's something that can be turned, because everybody loves it. Even with my wife now. You know what I did on New Year's Eve one year?
listen, this is getting a bit personal.
No.
The word icky comes to mind here. So,
Don't say yuck. Don't say yuck.
Okay, keep going. If I don't like it, I'll just walk
So
off.
what we do is
You said walk off?
I'll walk
Oh, okay, I thought you could have been.
So there's
I tried to enunciate,
So quite often there's comedy shows on New Year's Eve, comedy shows. And we love doing that. New Year's Eve. We don't want to, you know what? I just want to go see a comedy show because I just want to laugh and enter the
the
new
Massey
year.
Hall shows?
Yeah.
Yeah, those are,
Yeah.
And I
So
miss
I love them.
I miss them because Massey Hall is under renovations and
Yes.
post-COVID. So I don't think we'll be doing that show again until 2022.
Oh,
Wow, but full house on New
Yeah.
Year's
I know,
Eve.
Oh, yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great. Those are great shows, and everybody loves doing them. It's the best place to be for a comic on that night. No,
Yes.
even the clubs, it's better. That Massey Hall show is great.
I agree.
And it's uncensored.
Agreed.
So sometimes you might get a big gig at Just for Laughs, for instance, and you're playing to 2,000 people, but they tell you what to say, and you can't do this, and you can't do that.
Yeah.
And this, I just book people, and I say, do your best 10.
Oh, so you're all uncensored. That's good
Yeah.
to
All
know.
uncensored.
Wow.
So I got two more. I got a question for Mark, and then a closing question for the both of you that I'm going to toss. The word icon and your name are usually sometimes, paired together. Do you see yourself as an icon, and how do you manage filling those shoes?
Well, I don't know whether you can see, but maybe the camera can see that I have extremely small feet. I actually take a men's size 5, which is very, very small. So filling my shoes is not really a big problem. Pretty much anybody could do that. I don't know. I mean, I was in the right place at the right time. I made the right decisions. I made some of the wrong decisions. But when I got my Order of Canada, I was really, really humbled because it actually showed that somebody out there was listening to what I've been doing for the past 4 years. And that was very, very gratifying. So, yeah, I think when I pass this mortal coil, there'll be a nice obituary in the papers, and then people will completely forget all about me because that's how it works.
No, I don't think so.
I don't think so. So this is the last question, and since you're a special guest, I'll have you answer last, Mark. For both of you, same question. Knowing what you know now, George, in business, what would present-day George tell 20 years ago George to do differently in business?
Yeah, I didn't realize that, when you became an adult, you would be touched with a lot of stresses and dealing with a lot of different things. And from a business and a personal standpoint, the one thing that I realized is that people have a lot of stress in them. People have a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of responsibility. For example, being an entrepreneur and caring for your employees, and myself, it's a lot of stress. Raising families in today's environment is a lot of stress. And, I like to tell people when you have something that you need to speak to someone, you got to find someone. And sometimes it's very hard. But as human beings and myself now, when people want to talk to me, I always have an ear. Because that person, when they reach out to you, I find that they reach out for a reason. And sometimes my kids, they come to me with a reason, and I go, I don't have time for you. But when people reach out to you, you got to listen, because that's so important. And so that's something I would change, is that I got to stop having business and working interfere with people coming to me with something very, very important, both in my personal life and my family life. And, that's something I'm going to change for sure. I think I'm pretty good at it, but I need to turn it up. I got to make time for people who need me.
Okay. Right? And what would Mark of today tell Church Street booking dollar a head shows?
Well, 1981 or 1982, my friend who was always very financially savvy came to me and said, look, there's this stock that you should buy. Just buy 100 shares of it. It's cheap, and I think it's going to go somewhere. It's called Apple Computer. And I said to him, oh yeah,
God.
like people are going to put computers in their houses.
Yeah.
What do you think I am, an idiot?
Okay.
I think we all missed that one.
Yeah.
All right. And I think that's it. I want to thank both you and George for joining us on the Wealth No Joke podcast in conjunction with Taurus Mortgage and the No Bull. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your words, and thank you for the information. And same to you, George. I really want to thank you for joining us and sitting in. So.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thanks, Marky.
Thank you.
Thanks, John Paul.
Thanks,
Any
John
last
Paul.
words you want to mention to?
We're good.
Keep smiling.